Hi guys, David O'Sullivan here, and this video I'm going to be giving you a special bonus video on Logan. I loved it so much, and there were so many things in this film that I wanted to talk about that I wasn't able to touch upon in my spoiler-free review. I figured it would make sense that I would do a spoiler talk for Logan. The film has been out a week now, so I'm pretty sure everyone who really wants to see it has seen it now already. If you haven't seen it, then I would recommend going and checking the film out because it's really great, and then coming back because I'm going to be talking spoilers in this film. I'm going to be going in depth on very spoilerific things that's going to ruin the film for you if you haven't seen it. So if you haven't seen it, watch the film, then come back. I'm pretty sure if you're watching this video you've seen the film, but there we go. In this video I'm going to give you my spoiler-filled thoughts on Logan. I'm not going to go too much into what I think about the film and whether I like it or not, because I've already done like a 18-minute review where I talk about how much I love the film. So obviously I really like the film. However, as far as spoilers go, I love how this film opens up in a very dystopian future in which everything's gone to shit essentially. And you could say that, oh wait, hang on a minute, it was all happy and wonderful in Days of Future Past. How is it suddenly all gone bad again? But I kind of like that because it's hinted in Days of Future Past that no matter how much you try and change the future, it will always course correct itself. So even if you change something from happening in one particular way, it will still happen but in a slightly different way. And I like that because we see that come into effect in Logan. Okay, there's no Sentinels now, there's no post-apocalyptic future, but things still end up going bad just slightly later and through a slightly different way. So mutants weren't wiped out through Sentinels, but they were wiped out just through a kind of natural extinction and eradication through the means of science, as we learn in this film. And I love that. So it's like, okay, it still kind of happens, but it's not through kind of Sentinels and a post-apocalyptic future war, but it's through kind of extinction and science in a way. So I really like that, and it gives the film an opportunity to kind of stand apart and be something different. It's a very different setting, it's a very different world. In this film, we see these characters in this dystopian future in which it's America, but it's not as America as we know it. It's a very kind of dark, kind of run-down, really kind of rubbish version in which everything's gone really badly and everyone's kind of doesn't want to live in the country. It's kind of funny actually, because it's almost kind of timely to what's going on now in America. I don't want to get too political here, but it's kind of ironic because this film is like filmed like a year ago. You know, they were starting the pre-production on it probably like a couple of years ago. So it's kind of odd now that it has to come out at this time, and it kind of mirrors what's going on in the world today. It's kind of scary, but you know, how, you know, we're kind of almost heading towards that. As I said, I don't want to get too heavy in the politics here, but there's even a bit in the film where Wolverine's on the Mexican border and there's a war. And you know, everyone's kind of trying to escape the hellhole that is America, and they're trying to kind of flee the country and get to Canada. Which is kind of funny when you think about it, but yeah, obviously they couldn't have known that when making this film. And I was watching an interview the other day actually, and what was really great is that's brought up to Patrick Stewart. You know, was that in any way kind of intentional, or was it just coincidental? And I think it was coincidental, but he brought up a really interesting point, which is it's not necessarily art catching up to life, it's almost kind of real life catching up to art, because the movies have been doing this for years now, showing kind of dark dystopian versions of the future in which everything goes badly. They've been doing that for quite a long time now. Obviously it was in Days of Future Past as well. It's more of a realistic way here, but now it's kind of like real life's almost kind of catching up to these kind of dark dystopian kind of sci-fi films where it's like it's almost not sci-fi anymore, it's almost like becoming a reality, which is kind of scary. But yeah, I just love the kind of dystopian world this movie's set in, and how that really sets it apart from the other films, and we see these characters in very different places. And what I loved about the character of Charles in this film, which I didn't really touch upon that much in my spoiler-free review, is that he's essentially a very different kind of Charles we've ever seen before. And I love what they did with Charles in Days of Future Past, and that really humanised him. They really grounded his character, brought him down to our level. We could really relate to him and understand where he's coming from. In this film, oh my god, they ground him even more so with the Patrick Stewart version as well, because one of my minor gripes with the character of Professor X in the other movies is that he's very wise and zen-like, and he's supposed to be like that, but we can't really connect with him. We can't really kind of, he's not almost like a real emotional human being because he's so calm and composed and in control. In this film, he's just completely broken and damaged and falling apart and dying essentially. And I'd never even thought about them doing that before in a film with Charles, but it makes so much sense when you think about it, because he's in like his 90s in this film, so it's like he's really old, and the fact that they're depicting a Charles who's very kind of just elderly, mentally ill, it's just like, wow, it's heartbreaking in a way, because as I said, every other time we've seen this character, he's so calm and composed and in control. In this, he's completely broken. He's falling apart, essentially. The degenerative brain disease. It's never explicitly said what it is, Alzheimer's, dementia, or whatever it is. It's a degenerative brain disease. And it's such an ingenious move, I think. I touched upon this in my spoiler-free review. The fact that the character has these kind of psychic, telepathic powers. I never even thought, what would happen if a character who had those powers got a degenerative brain disease? And it's so interesting what they do with these seizures. So it's like he's having a seizure, but it's like a psychic seizure, you know. So when he has these seizures, everyone around him is affected, so he essentially could kill anyone around him. And that's like touched upon in X2 when the Striker takes Charles and he tries to use Charles and Cerebro to kind of wipe out the entire planet, because if he wanted to, Charles could literally kill every single person on the planet. And in this film, that could actually become a reality because he's lost control of his powers. And another thing I have to mention, it's briefly touched upon in that radio transmission in the car. Charles killed the X-Men. It's like, whoa, I did not see that coming, because I was thinking going into this film, where's another X-Men? Like, where's Storm? Where's Jean? Where's Cyclops? Are they going to make cameos? Are they going to be referenced in any way? Like, where are they? Okay, they're the only two left. What the hell happened to everyone else? I get the fact that it was through kind of that company was trying to eradicate mutants and trying to kind of put this virus out there to try and wipe them all out. But like, what the hell happened to the X-Men? And I never even thought, it never even crossed my mind that it was Charles. And of course, when it was revealed that he had one of those seizures at the X-Mansion, and hundreds were injured, several people were killed, including the X-Men, and then Wolverine turns it off, I was like, oh my god. And when you think about it, it makes so much sense, because in this film, when he has a seizure, they've got to desperately get to him as fast as they can and sedate him before he ends up killing anyone. But if you think about it, when that happened the first time, they would have been completely unprepared. It would have taken them all off guard. So I'm presuming that when those X-Men were killed at the mansion, I'm presuming that was the first time it happened. Because if you think about it, the first time that happened, they would have been completely unprepared. They wouldn't have had any medication. They wouldn't have been able to sedate him. That's probably what happened. He probably just only had this seizure for the very first time, and there wasn't anything they could do about it. And I'm presuming, obviously we don't see it, I was really thinking, are they going to flash back and show this to us? But they didn't, and I'm glad they didn't, because it was kind of more powerful in that we didn't see it. If that happened for the first time, there wouldn't have been anything they could do, and I'm guessing Logan essentially managed to kind of take him down somehow and managed to stop it. But yeah, I'm guessing that's what happened, and then it was going on for so long that it probably killed the majority of the X-Men. It's like, wow, I did not expect them to do that. Credit to them for that, really taking risks and really kind of pushing it and doing something really quite different, essentially wiping out the X-Men. Just Logan and Charles there on the run, hiding out from the world. It's really great. I love this film because it feels like just a character-driven drama. I mean, it is essentially, you know, this isn't really a superhero movie. It feels almost like an indie drama. It's essentially just a film about these characters, and they just happen to have superpowers. And that's what I love so much about it. It's what I love so much about my favourite comic book movies. They're not just great comic book movies, but they're great films that can stand on their own, and they hold up as great films in their own right, even if you take away the comic booky elements, even if you strip away the superpowers, the action scenes, they still hold up as great films, and you can apply that to Logan as well. And of course, I've got to talk about X-23 in this film. Laura, played by Daphne Keane. If you'll see my spoiler-free review, you'll know that I thought she was fantastic in this film. She really blew me away, and she was so great in that role, obviously the female clone of Wolverine. I love how they played that dynamic of like, also with Charles and Logan, it's almost like a father-son dynamic, and then with Logan and Laura, it's almost like a father-daughter dynamic. And I love how this film is essentially all about kind of family and relationships. It's done so well, because if it wasn't handled well, it would have come off a little bit, you know, that's not really work. But they built these characters up now over so many films that when we see them in a film like this, it really works because we've seen so much of these characters before, but even in just this film alone, they really kind of flesh out and develop these characters, particularly Charles, even more so, and it's even more emotional and dramatic because of that. I love the father-son dynamic between Charles and Logan, which has never really been explored that much before. A little bit, kind of, in some of the other films, but they really go all out in this film, and it's so great. It's really quite emotional as well when he's just carrying Charles. Laura as well, and it's almost like a father-daughter dynamic, and she essentially is his daughter because they use kind of Logan's DNA to kind of create her, so she's essentially his daughter genetically as well. And yeah, I just love how the film ends as well, of course, with Wolverine dying. I honestly, I didn't think they were going to go that far. I thought at least one of those two major characters would die, either Charles or Logan. I thought they would kill Charles off and leave Logan alive, but the fact that they killed both Charles and Logan, both of them, they just went all out. I've just got to give them a massive amount of credit there, because that was a gutsy move, and I really like that they did that as well, because if this is going to be the last film, if this is really going to be the end of the story, so to speak, just go all out, you know, really make it the end of the story, really kind of put some kind of finality into it. And the fact that it ends with them both dying, it just makes so much sense, because this is the end of their story, you know, so it makes sense that it would end with their deaths essentially. And it's really kind of rewarding. It really worked. It's really emotionally satisfying, because obviously this whole thing started with kind of Charles and Logan in the very first X-Men back in 2000. The fact that it ends with Charles and Logan and then dying in Logan now in 2017, I think it works so incredibly well. And obviously how they die essentially, sacrifice themselves to save Laura, and I'm sure we'll be seeing her and some of those new kids soon. This is just a theory here, but I wonder if they'll do like X-Force in the future, and I wonder if they'll kind of get brought in by X-Force and get trained by the X-Force team or something, and then maybe Laura might become a member of that team, or maybe they'll have their own film, or you know, they'll set it a few years later, she'll be slightly older, and then X-23 will have her own film. Who knows? I can't wait to see what they'll do there. I'm sure they'll go back to that, but I'm glad there was no of the credits tease. I did stake it into the credits. I saw it early, end of February, so even if there was an end credits tag, it probably wouldn't have been attached. But I'm glad there wasn't an end credits scene, because when the film ended, I'm like, there's no way there's going to be an end credits scene. I was like, okay, we'll stay to the end just in case. But it made sense, because this really was the end of the story. Dead, buried, gone, it's finished. So it's like, if they had an end credits tag, it just would have taken away from the finality of that final moment. Cutting to black, Logan. That's it. That's the end of the story. There's nothing else to tease. There's no sequel coming after this. You know, the characters are dead and gone, you know, so there's only usually an end credits tease when there's a follow-up coming very soon and they're teasing the next film. It's the last film, it's the end of the story, so it made sense there was no end credits tease. And of course, I've got to talk about one of the biggest things that seems to be dividing a lot of people is X-24, the clone of Wolverine. And I've got to admit, when this first happened in the film, it completely took me off guard. I was like, wait, what? It really came out of left field. But even though it shocked me at first and I wasn't overly keen on it at first, the more I thought about it, the more the film went on, and after the film finished, I'm like, you know what, that was the right move. A, because it was different, it wasn't what I was expecting, and B, it worked best for the story, because I really wanted him to have Sabretooth in this film. I so wanted Sabretooth to appear. I really wish they had him in just like a cameo even. There might have been some schedule conflicts with getting Liev Schreiber back, but in a way, the more I thought about it, the more I thought, you know what, it was the right move not to bring Sabretooth back, because as much as I would have loved to have seen Sabretooth again, to kind of put some finality on that relationship between Logan and Victor, it would have taken away from this film, because in this film the spotlight is on Logan and Charles, on Logan and Laura. This film is all about those two relationships. So if they brought Victor back in there, it would have then become about Logan and Victor as well. And even though X-Men Origins isn't a great film, that film is all about the Logan and Victor relationship. So if they brought him back in this film, it would have taken the spotlight away from Logan and Charles, away from Logan and Laura, and it would have made it more about Logan and Victor. And so I'm glad they didn't do that in a way. And it also made more sense as well that it wasn't Sabretooth, that it was just some mindless, feral kind of being, you know, that who doesn't have an emotional attachment to. And the more I think about it, the more I'm like, yeah, it makes sense that it was a clone and it wasn't Sabretooth, because they needed a kind of dark reflection of Wolverine, a kind of what he could have become if the Weapon X program was successful. What he's seeing, this clone, this is what he would have turned out like if they were successful with Weapon X. This is like kind of the representation of the kind of the true darkest side of his nature. Like, this is what he could have become. So it's kind of, I like what they did there, and he's almost facing a kind of darker kind of mirror reflection of himself. And in a way, when you think about it, it's really great, because across all these films, no one was ever able to kill him. The only person that killed him was himself. It's like, no one can kill him but himself. And in a way, it makes so much sense. The only person that can really challenge and defeat Wolverine would be Wolverine. And even though I was bummed out it wasn't Sabretooth, the more I thought about it, it was like, wait, hang a minute, they've got his DNA. Why not make a clone? You know, you're trying to take out Wolverine, you've got Wolverine's DNA, why don't you just make a clone of Wolverine? So the more I thought about it, I was like, yeah, it did make sense. It wouldn't have made sense for them not to make a clone of Wolverine, you know. You've got his DNA, make a clone, you know. So, and I think it did really work. And he was used sparingly as well, he wasn't in it a lot. And one last character I have to talk about is Caliban, played by Stephen Merchant. This is a character that I didn't even bring up in my spoiler-free review, but it was one of the only things going to this film that I was slightly worried about. I think Stephen Merchant is great, he really is, but as a kind of mutant kind of character in an X-Men movie, I'm like, is that going to work? Is it going to feel a bit out of place? Thankfully, he was great in the role, and it really worked. He only had a small part in the film, but the part that he played was really great, and I really liked him in that role. He did a really good job. He's kind of back and forth with Hugh Jackman as Logan and their kind of interactions. I thought it was really great. So luckily, he was really good in the film. He was the only thing going into it. I was like, oh, is that going to work? But luckily, he was really good. And also, I've got to touch on the action sequences quickly. Specifically, some of my favourite action sequences, I've got to mention that first one where they're trying to get Laura and then they end up having that fight with the Reavers and then that great car chase. It really is, when you sit back and look at it, that was a really great car chase scene where she jumps on the car and then they drive away, they're driving after them, they're trying to get through the fence, they spin around, they break through. It's a really great car chase sequence, that scene. I love it. And then obviously that bit how it ends with the train just getting around the front of the train there, I loved that moment. I thought it was a really great scene. And of course I've got to talk about the Berserker Rage scene in the woods. Finally, after all these years, we kind of got it before in like X-Men 2 and the mansion scene, but in this they go all out, the blood, the gore, the violence. And I love it, because I touched upon this in my spoiler-free review, but it's more realistic. You see blood. In the other films where people are being slashed and shot, it's like, why is there no blood? Were they made of dust or something? It's like, in this one we actually see blood. I love how they implemented that kind of serum stuff into it, because he's so old and knackered in the film. He's essentially hobbling and coughing the whole film. So when we eventually get this scene of him running, like, it's like even more kind of fulfilling and exciting to see, because up until that point he's quite slow and tired. So when we get that moment where he's just running, and then Laura sees him, it's such a great moment, and going berserker rage and all the guys there, him teaming up with Laura like a tag team there. Oh my god, it's so great. It's like the most unorthodox parents kind of kid relationship in a movie, but it's still really emotional and it really works. And one last thing I have to touch upon is the use of the comic books. I was defending this before the film because people are like, oh, what the hell, comic books? What? I was like, other films have done it before. We had comic books in Captain America: The First Avenger, and that the world created these Captain America comics based on what Captain America's exploits in the war and those war videos. So I think it made perfect sense, and I really liked how that was a part of the story as well, where Logan has like this disdain for comics, where it's like they're kind of like taking what actually happened in the real world and presenting it in more of a kind of comical cartoon way, and he's just like disgusted by the comics. And I really like that. So it's like what's going on in the real world is actually what really happened, and the comics are just a representation of what actually happened, but it's not actually that kind of truthful. And I thought it was really cool. And a lot of people are complaining like, oh, why can't we have seen him in the suit? And I'd love to see him in the suit. I think the suit can be done well in live action. I think if they eventually reboot Wolverine at some point in the future and make it more like the comics, it could work. But in this film, it has that ultra kind of realistic vibe. And Logan even rips on comic books in that particular scene and says how stupid and idiotic he thinks they are. So for it to end up him in that suit from the comics would have made literally zero sense. He in the film, he's like the last person that would put on a comic book costume. So it was like, I'm glad they didn't go that route. Even though I'd love to see him and Wolverine in the suit on film, it would have made no sense to have had that in this film. And there we have it. That wraps up my spoiler thoughts on Logan. as you can tell, I really like the film. If you want to know more about what I really liked about it in particular, be sure to check out my spoiler-free review. But yeah, that's my thoughts on Logan. If you like this and you haven't already, be sure to click subscribe to see more. But for now, I've been David O'Sullivan. I'll see you next time.